Hey everyone, Miss Rochelle here. Welcome back to our lesson on choices. We have two memory verses this quarter. You guys have already learned the first one, but I want to hear you say it to make sure you've been practicing. Go ahead. Great job, you guys. Even though we've moved on to our second memory verse, make sure you're practicing this one so you don't forget it. Here's our new memory verse. It's a little bit longer. I want us to say it together. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Proverbs 3:5-6. This one is a bit longer, but I believe in you. I know you can memorize this verse by the end of our unit. Just keep trying and keep practicing. We have been talking a lot about choices throughout this unit. People who have made good choices, like Joshua and Caleb, who chose to trust God when they were entering the promised land. We've also talked about some bad choices, like Lot's wife, who chose to disobey God and look back when she was told to keep going forward. This week, we are going to be talking about some more good choices, the choice of a man named Daniel and his friends. Now, Daniel made some good choices. He was really careful with what he looked at. He was really careful and thought about how he would use his hands or where he would go with his feet or what he chose to listen to and who he chose to obey. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little mouth, what you say. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little feet, where you go. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. For the Father up above is looking down with love. So be careful, little hands, what you do. Thanks, girls. So let's talk more about Daniel's choices and how he was very careful with what he chose to do, how he chose to use his eyes and ears and hands and feet, and who he chose to obey. We're also going to talk a little bit about the choice of Daniel's three friends. You guys probably know the story of Daniel really well, and it's found in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. We're going to talk a little bit about three different stories that we find in the book of Daniel. So first of all, you remember when Daniel was first brought into captivity, he chose to eat different food than a lot of the other captives, food that was acceptable and pleasing to God. And Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, chose to eat the food that was acceptable to God as well. This was a really good choice. It's always a good choice to listen and obey God and do what's pleasing to him as opposed to what's pleasing to others. Later on in Daniel's life, we read about Daniel in the lion's den in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Now, Daniel went ahead and prayed to God even when it was against the rules. And he was thrown into the lion's den because of that. However, he was saved from the lion's den, and his choice to pray to God even when it was against the rules was a good choice, because we should always love and serve and obey God rather than others. But the story we really want to focus on today is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We read about this story in the book of Daniel as well. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also brought into captivity along with Daniel when the Babylonians invaded Israel. King Nebuchadnezzar promoted 3 captives to be officials in Babylon, and he gave them new names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. It was 90 feet high, and he set it up, and all the rulers and officials were summoned to attend a dedication to this image. And that included Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A herald loudly proclaimed, "Everyone is commanded, as soon as you hear the musical instruments, to fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Anyone who does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So as soon as the music played, everyone bowed down to the golden image, except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They believed that they should worship God and God alone. So some of the Babylonians reported to Nebuchadnezzar that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had not bowed down to the golden image, and that they didn't worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gods. At that, King Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered the 3 men to be brought before him. He gave them one chance to bow down when the music played, or they'd be thrown into that fiery furnace. "Do you think there's any God that can save you?" Nebuchadnezzar shouted. The 3 men bravely replied, "Yes, Your Majesty. If the God whom we serve is able to save us from the blazing furnace and from your power, then he will. But even if he chooses not to save us, we're not going to worship your God, and we're not going to bow down to the golden statue." Nebuchadnezzar lost his temper, and his face turned red with anger. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. His soldiers tied up the 3 men and threw them into the roaring furnace. The men who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace were killed because of the heat, just because they got close to the fiery furnace. After they were thrown into the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement. "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" he asked. "Yes, we did, Your Majesty," those around him responded. "Then why do I see 4 men walking around in the fire?" he asked. "And they're not tied up. And they show no signs of being hurt." So Nebuchadnezzar went to the door of the furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out!" And they came out at once. The princes, governors, and other officials gathered to look at the 3 men. They hadn't even been harmed by the fire. Their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. The king praised the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said that even though the men disobeyed his orders and were thrown into the fiery furnace, they survived because their God was powerful enough to save them. The king stated, "I command that if anyone speaks disrespectfully to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he is to be torn limb from limb, and his house is to be made a pile of ruins. There is no other God who can rescue like this." And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These images were brought to us by freebibleimages.org. So there are some choices made in these stories. First of all, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ate the food that was approved by God. Then Daniel prayed even though the king had forbidden it. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to worship the idol, despite being threatened with the fiery furnace. So are these good choices or bad choices? We've had a lot of bad choices as we've looked at choices throughout this unit, but this week we have all good choices. Of course, it was good of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to eat the food approved by God. And it was, of course, good for Daniel to pray, even when it was forbidden. And then for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to refuse to worship an idol, even when they were threatened with a fiery furnace, is an amazing good choice. What a good example of obeying God and serving and worshiping only Him, even in difficult times. Remember to make good choices. Always obey God, even when it is difficult, and trust in God, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. You guys have a great week.